The Ascomycota are also known as sac fungi. And this is because of the shape of their sexual reproduction structure. Specifically, that sexual reproduction structure is going to be known as an ascus, and that's really where the name comes from. If we look at the examples on this slide, these are going to include what we call the cup fungi, which you're seeing on the bottom. We do have the morels. Truffles will be in this group as well. And then we also have the yeast down here on the bottom. So these are best known for this fruiting structure, which we call an ascus. So these fungi are named after their fruiting structure. The ascus is a sac that contains the ascospores. So on the bottom in this picture, you're seeing an example of this, but these are going to be long, slender sacs usually, and they will contain these ascospores. And these ascospores, there will be 8 of them within each one of these asci is what we call them. So if you count down here, in this particular one, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you can see that we have 8 of these ascospores within a single ascus. Now we do have various structures that hold these. This would be one typical shape. It's kind of a cup shape to it. This is called an Nazca Carp. And within this, you would have a bunch of these asci. So they would be like this, and they would run the whole way around. And each one of these would contain the 8 ascospores. So I'll just draw it into a few of these. Okay, so that is the structure for sexual reproduction. This would then be connected to a bunch of mycelium, which would be underneath the Earth's surface. So this is for sexual reproduction. We can also have spores produced for asexual reproduction. And when this happens, these are called conidia. So this is for asexual. Now these are going to be produced just on the tips of the hyphae. So this is tips of the hyphae. There's no special fruiting structure involved in this, so there's no Nazca Carp or asci involved. And it's just like what you see in this picture. You're going to have this hyphae that extends up. It's going to maybe have like a bulb-shaped structure on the end. And then you will just have these little spores that form right on top of that. And we usually have a whole bunch of them. So they really form these very pretty structures to them. And this whole thing is called a conidiophore. And the individual spores are called conidia. So this would be just for asexual reproduction. So many species will perform lots of asexual reproduction and we'll get lots of conidia, and then we'll have other ones that form lots of ascocarps and ascospores. So if we look here at a typical life cycle, we have down here some mycelium. These would be growing asexually just by mitosis. And if there is a need to reproduce, they're going to produce some conidia, which will be spores that just form on the tips of the hyphae, and then these conidia would be dispersed. If they land in a favorable location, they would germinate. Now, if we're going to have sexual reproduction, we do need 2 compatible mating types, a positive and a negative. If those 2 come together, then we can get the plasmogamy, the fusion of the cytoplasm, and then we would later get karyogamy, which would be the fusion of the nuclei. Once we get that diploid nucleus formed, we would have the process of meiosis, which gives us 4 haploid nuclei, and then each one of those haploid nuclei is going to undergo mitosis, which will give us that characteristic number of 8. So we will have 8 ascospores, which will be held inside a single sac, which we call an ascus. Now here on this slide, you're seeing a nice picture of that ascocarp you can see that that holds a bunch of different sacs together in close proximity to each other. Since it's sexual reproduction that is producing all of these individual ascospores, we would expect all of those to pretty much be different genetically. The Basidiomycota are typically the fungi that people think of when they talk fungi. These are what we call the club fungi because of their structure. And these are the ones that you tend to see if you go take a walk outside. So these have that typical mushroom structure to them. They also include what we call the puffball fungi. They include the shelf fungi as well. These are mostly decomposers. We do have some that form mycorrhizae. And then we do have some that are going to be parasites. And so the parasite ones, we have several that are what we call rusts. And then we also have some that we call smuts. And we'll see that those do affect and cause some diseases of plants. If we look at the typical structure for a fungi in the Basidiomycota, it's what you see in this picture here. It's the mushroom structure. Well, that mushroom is the fruiting structure in the sexual reproduction structure of this group. So if we draw us a little fungi here, this mushroom is what we call the Basidiomycota. This Basidiomycota is for sexual reproduction, and right underneath here, you a lot of times have little gills, and within those gills, we have a structure that's going to be called the basidium. So if we look in this picture, this would be located right underneath here. We're going to get basidium. And the basidium is going to form, and it will get what's called basidiospores on the tip. So these are our basidiospores. And we will have a characteristic number of 4 of those on each of the basidium. If we take a look at the life cycle, if we have 2 sexually compatible strains, they can come together and we can get plasmogamy occur. We can later get karyogamy, and that will fuse the nuclei together, and then each one of those diploid nuclei will undergo meiosis. When it undergoes meiosis, we're going to get 4 basidiospores. So you can see that on the basidium, which is this structure here, we're going to get 4 basidiospores hanging off the top. Where you would see these located is going to be right underneath the mushroom, and it's going to be within those gills. So the gills will produce a lot of surface area, which we can have lined with these basidia and the corresponding basidiospores on the top. Since this is bisexual reproduction and meiosis, these are going to be genetically different from each other. Now, when we talk about the Basidiomycota, you see that little mushroom on the top of the ground. That is just a small part of the overall organism. So this fungi would form a huge network underground. And you may have seen something similar to what you're seeing in these pictures here, and this is what we tend to call a fairy ring. Fairy rings are these circular, what seems like a circular ring of mushrooms that appears overnight. Well, what happens is you have a bunch of mycelium all throughout here, and once that fungi exhausts the nutrients that are present, or has exhausted a lot of the nutrients that are present, it sends up these reproductive structures. So the mycelium can send up and produce a Basidiomycota in just a matter of a couple hours. So you see these mushrooms appear overnight because there is a huge mass of mycelium underneath the ground that all works together to erect this one Basidiomycota.